real sets, practical effects.
You've been here, but you don't know this story.
So I'm a writer and director, and the key thing with writing is to think. I get a lot of ideas all the time, and I think for a lot of writers it's about really focusing on what ideas work best and actually sticking with one or two. So for me, it's when I get an idea which I think would work well as a film, and then I let it sort of settle in my head for a while. I think about it, and then I'll do an outline. So I'll write like a page or two and look at the key points and whether it will stick together. And then I might think of a pitch or a one or two liners, and then I might tell a few people to see their reaction to it.
When you look at something, you have to decide whether to try and get what you want in camera, what we call in camera, so that means with no digital augmentation or very little digital augmentation, or whether you go completely CG. Sometimes it's actually easier just to create an entire CG background and have the actor just on green screen, for example. You know, but all of those questions are up to a CG effects supervisor, and there'll always be somebody on set, or there should be somebody on set that will make those decisions in collaboration with the director and the producer.
Once I've got my script, then I think about locations and what we're going to do inside, what we're going to do outside. Personally, I'm not a big fan of green screen, so I like to avoid it as much as I can. I like to use real locations. I think it helps for the actors, it helps for me. So I'm not a guy that draws and does big storyboards. I like to go to locations and almost like a photographer and see what works. Some people are different. Some people are very conceptual and they can draw it all, and then they want to use a studio. I'm more the other way. I like to let locations inspire me. So once I've got the beats of my film, then I go and look at locations. And then I find when I get good locations, that might change the story. So it's inspiration to me.
So of course, some of those decisions that we make around physical and digital, whether to go physical or digital with things, can take time to arrive at those decisions. But essentially what tends to happen right at the beginning of the movie is that you'll get a director, a producer, your physical effects guy like Richard Taylor, your digital effects guy like Joe Lettieri who heads up with digital. So you'll get all of these people sitting around the table and you'll work through certain scenes, and you'll talk about who's going to take responsibility for it, maybe, or, whether it's physical or digital. And so you formulate a plan, you stick to that plan until the plan changes, and then suddenly you'll get the digital guys picking up stuff that we as physical manufacturers can't do, or it just doesn't quite work properly, or Peter, the director is not getting what they want from it, so you just have to change tack. But those decisions tend to be done in conjunction with one another. A director will have a CG supervisor there who will say, yeah, we can pick up that, and add another shot to our ever-growing list of things to do, or change this, that, or the other thing, and or physical. From our perspective, we can go, yeah, we can make something. It's an organic process at some level, and some directors are more organic than others. Some directors are still changing ideas on the day that we're shooting. So things can change very, very quickly. And the difference between physical shots and CGI, and they're the same kind of constraints, really. It's budgetary for a start, is a huge deal. It's who's on board on your film and who's capable. What the type of film is in the first place, whether it's interior, exterior, futuristic, sci-fi, old, whatever. So you've got all these different elements, and no movie is going to be the same as the one that follows it. You've always got to make these decisions sort of as you go. When you look at over time, I think Lord of the Rings, and the first Lord of the Rings movie in 2000 probably had, I think it was probably around about 700 or 800 digital shots. It may have been slightly more. By the second movie, that had climbed to about 1,400 or 1,500, and by the third movie, it had climbed to about 2,500. So it's quite a massive climb through, and those weren't digital heavy movies really in comparison to more recent years. When you look at movies like The Hobbit, which I would struggle to think of shots that aren't digitally augmented.
So budget, for me at the beginning, doesn't come into it. It's a feel and a look I like. So I like as much real as possible. And then the CGI comes in to complement that. Generally, budget will come in later on. And then it's a case of working with the two. So I would then consult my practical effects expert and my visual effects expert to get a nice blend between the two. But I think it's also good for visual effects to have a practical reference on set. So I would always do practical first, always. Let's say I have a scene in a house. I would rather film in a house than build a room in a studio. So unless it was like a big, like almost, if the entire film was set indoors, then maybe we would look at that. But I prefer to use real locations as much as I can. But that's just me. I think, for me, the best way to use CGI is when it works with practical effects and real effects. Like the new Mad Max film is a good example. They shot real trucks and then they added extra stuff onto it, rather than do the whole thing CGI. So for me, when you do something completely CGI, it often looks a bit fake. But when you get elements of real effects, like Batman Begins did that, Christopher Nolan, the new Star Wars films are going that way. You get real effects and complement with CGI is a really nice balance. So for me personally, that's the way I think things are going, and it adds, people still like that real thing. So if you get that real model, we know the difference. There's like a weight to it. And then other elements of it can be CGI'd. So I'm very wary of 100% CGI. I like a balance of the two. The pros are that you get it on the day. If you're happy with it, then it's done. So the cons are that it takes a lot longer often. Maybe it'll be more expensive to shoot, so up front there's more costs than later down the track. So it can take a lot more time. And it may not look exactly as you want. You don't have the control you have later on in a visual effects run. Digital visual effects are, that while you're filming, you can go a lot faster because you think we can leave that till later. So you can really shoot through your practical filming much quicker and cheaper. And then in the edit room, you have a lot more time because you have weeks, months to then get your shots right. So, which is why a lot of people like to do it that way. The cons are, though, it can end up costing you a lot more money because visual effects is very expensive and it may not look exactly as you would have liked it on the day. So even though you'll do it as best you can, it may not be quite there. But then it may be that you change it later in post-production. So you always try to do the best you can, but things might always end up differently. And so as a director, you need to be flexible on that. And nothing the way you think it's going to happen will be. It'll either be better or worse or different. So you need to be very flexible in that regard. And trust the crew around you. I trust my special effects people. I'm not a special effects artist, so I need to trust them that they're going to do their best on set.
We faced lots of challenges, obviously, post Lord of the Rings and Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe, where we had to accelerate into new areas of filmmaking, really, and Avatar was a very good example. District 9 was another one. Obviously, of a very different beast to what we'd been used to dealing with in terms of swords and armour and weapons and all those sorts of things. Because all that earthiness tends to have a great organic kind of nature to it. Some of it's perfect in its form, and it has to be beautifully executed, but it is still organic in its nature. And so suddenly we had a great deal of physical model makers who that organic stuff really appeals to that way of forming things, because it's got that man-made feel to it. Armour and weapons and all those sorts of things are man-made. The objects on Avatar, of course, are machine-made, and so they have a highly structured, highly polished look and feel to them. So you can't cover them in mud and blood and sort of think that it's all going to be okay. They need to look pristine and perfect. And so it lent itself more to that, the digital 3D modelling and machining and those kind of things. of course, we were just getting underway with some of that stuff, so we found Avatar quite challenging in terms of our ability to look at things and then turn them into digital models and then machine them and produce them. Meanwhile, we've got all of these physical model makers sitting there, twiddling their thumbs, wondering what to do. So Avatar was a good kind of first run of how we got those, how we tried to get that balance right. I mean, Avatar was a massive thing for us because I think we came out the other end of it feeling like we could actually run the whole gamut of any type of film and manage to pull it off. Like, we always knew we could do armour and weapons. We did armour and weapons very, very well. But Avatar told us that we could fit it for sci-fi as well, as was shown in later movies like Elysium and things like that, high-end futuristic props and costume props and things like that, really beautiful work. And it was done because, those 3D modelers in particular really up their game. And when you look at Weta's design department, the design department has changed significantly over the years. Where we always stood as illustrators and concept artists, and yet a lot of those guys now are 3D digital sculptors, and so the design process has ceased to be 2D. It actually becomes 3D straight off the bat. That to stay the same is to stagnate in this industry, and you just can't do that. So you need to be able to up and move and morph into new fields, and the designers embraced that for the most part. And so there become some highly skilled digital modelers in there, and some of the guys that were originally within the sculpting department that had worked in plasticine and clay all their careers made the move and the leap into modelling in ZBrush and Maya and those kind of things.
I go for more real if I can, so that's my preference, and I think a lot of people are going for that nice blend, as I say. So I think the future will have lots of practical, lots of CGI, and it'll just depend on the look and style that the director's wanting. But I think the public is now rebelling against fully CGI, like Sin City even. People don't want that now. People like that balance of reality with the use of special effects. That's coming back because I think there were a lot of films in the 90s and 2000s. You think of the Star Wars prequels are a good example where it's obvious everything is CGI. So yeah, I think there's now a nice healthy blend. I think it's a good place to be in right now, which is, some people think all of Mad Max is practical, and it's not. There's a lot of CGI in Mad Max. So I think there's a really nice blend of the two. And so I think that's the way forward. And I think human beings want what's real, but then sometimes it's not possible to give them everything. And so I think the key thing moving forward is for everyone to work together on what looks best, but to have that nice blend of practical, and then the touches are with CGI.
That whole film set mentality is all about, if you want to stay happy and sane, you need to understand that a great deal will change, and that you can't be married to ideas. If it's not a democracy. We don't all sit down at lunchtime and vote whether it's going to be physical or digital. It's about the director and the producer telling us what they want, and so you just got to go with that and accept that that's the way that it is, and be ready, for the next phase of the journey.